The idea for today was not just to highlight incredible research in early childhood happening, and thank you for those really extraordinary presentations, but to then allow the constituents of research, practice, and policy to react and to share their thoughts, having heard the discussion points that have been shared today. So I'm going to do a very, very brief overview, or just a introduction of our panelists. We have Dr. Stephanie Curenton, who's visiting with us from Rutgers. She's an assistant professor in the Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. And Stephanie's going to share her reaction from the perspective of a researcher in the field. We have Mr. Jack Fetty, who is the Director of Curriculum Instruction from Olentangy Local Schools, right up the road, the 7th largest district in the state. Then we will have our State Senator Peggy Lehner from the 6th Ohio Senate District share her thoughts. And then what we will do is allow some time for question and answer. If you have any lingering matters on your mind, make a jot down and we can have a general question and answer before we end the day in a reception together. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Curenton.
Thank you again for inviting me here. I am originally from Ohio, so I'm always happy to have an opportunity to come home. And I, as Laura was saying before, my training is in research, but I also had some policy experience, some real world policy experience. So my comments are sort of framed from the perspective of a policy sort of researcher. So I'll probably juggle a little back and forth between a research hat and a policy hat. And I tried to think about things in terms of 4 main takeaway points that I would offer to sort of the city and to the state. So one takeaway point that I want to share is I want to commend you guys on the work that you're already doing and the commitment that you've already shown, but I want to encourage you to take a long-term view and to stay the course. And I say this because what might happen is that you might not see some of those social and emotional benefits that we have from the model preschool programs until decades out, right? So don't be afraid of these ideas of fade out. Don't be afraid if within a couple years you don't see the cognitive benefits for your investments anymore. Catherine Magnuson has some recent work where she talks about ECE programs having what she calls sleeper effects, meaning that at one point they're there and then they kind of go underground and then they kind of come back. So I want to encourage you to take a long-term view because there might be sleeper effects sometime along the way in terms of this work that you're doing. And I also just want to remind you that when we think about those long-term social and health benefits that are associated with the program, those things didn't show up until the children were teenagers. So stay the course, take a long-term view. And along with that, in terms of taking a long-term view, I want to encourage you to insist upon ensuring that there's continuity and quality in that K-5 system. So it's very, very important for you to keep fighting for high quality at kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, because no matter what you do in the early childhood years, it can't last forever. It won't last all through high school if children do not have sort of this continuity of high quality care. The second point that I wanted to make was just to get you to think about access beyond the creation of slots. And I want you to think about access in terms of building infrastructure. And there are places, and I say this because there are places within your state, there are places within all states in which there are no programs that are high quality. And I call these places ECE deserts. So I want you to think about, when you think about building access or creating access, I want you to think about building that physical infrastructure, the hard infrastructure that really comes along with building facilities and creating programs. But in addition to that, I want you to think about creating what I call soft infrastructure as well. And soft infrastructure is sort of that collaboration, those partnerships among the different types of programs, right? So thinking about being really systematic and strategic about creating flexibility around funding streams and eligibility for the various ECE sectors, okay? A third point, I guess I'm talking fast. I only get 5 minutes anyway. A third point is that I want you to think about the whole child. Don't forget the whole child. And I say this as though even if you manage to create a really high quality classroom environment that children might experience for say 4 to 6 hours a day, that high quality classroom environment cannot shield children from 18 or 20 hours of a life in which they are experiencing a lot of hardship, a lot of pain, a lot of tragedy, right? So when I encourage you to thinking about the whole child, I want you to think about creating a system that not only focuses on what happens in that classroom environment, but that also focuses on health services that are offered to children, and that also focus on putting in resources to build up the communities in which the children live. And the last comment that I have, I got this comment from my new friend Millie that I met in the bathroom. So the line was really long in the bathroom. So Millie and I had a chat, and she raised a point that is very close to my heart and something that I think about often, but I did not originally have in terms of my takeaway points. And it's sort of this idea of understanding that high quality instruction is really a dynamic process, meaning that it's responsive to the language and the culture and the ability levels of individual students. And so when we think about creating slots, we can't just think about creating generalized slots. We have to create slots that are going to particularly fit children who are going to be in those slots, particularly fit the needs of the children that are going to be in those slots. And I feel like this really comes down to thinking about our professional development and our training at the in-service level when teachers are in college and learning to be teachers, but also at the pre-service level, but also at the in-service level. And at the pre-service level, what we know is that we need to do a better job educating teachers about how to address issues of multicultural education, address issues of working with children who are dual language learners, address issues of working with children with special needs, address issues with with students who might speak English at home, but maybe speak a different dialect of English as well. So we need to make sure that teachers are sort of equipped with the skills that they need in order to engage in this sort of dynamic instruction. So those would be my 4 takeaway points for you guys. And I'm very excited about the commitment that you've made and the path that you're on.
All right. Good afternoon. So I'm going to give you the practitioner's perspective, or a practitioner's perspective more appropriately. First of all, one takeaway that I had that I hope you all appreciate from whichever view you're coming from is Dr. Mashburn's encouragement for us to look at it from the child's perspective. In my role, in any role of an educator, I think we always need to look from the child's perspective when we're making decisions about children, about our students. And I think that was a great lens to look through today, so I appreciated that. Similarly, both of the speakers talked about the needed responsiveness to teacher needs. And how critical it is to respond to the teachers' needs in real time. As teachers are working with students with diverse abilities, having the support readily available for teachers is critical in any of these programs, I feel. Third, Dr. Yoshikawa mentioned mentoring and coaching specifically, potentially 2 times, was it per week or month? Per month. I think that's so important. in a district like mine that I come from, a fortunate district in a lot of ways, we have 15 elementary schools and one literacy coach per elementary school. It's about 650 to 700 students, roughly 30 classrooms, and one literacy coach. I'm glad they weren't here to hear 10 to 12, because then I'd have to continue that. But I wish we had 10 to 12 teachers per coach. Among our 15 elementaries, 9 of those schools house preschools. Our literacy coaches don't serve any of those preschool classrooms or preschool teachers, unfortunately. We should. But, when we look at all of the pressures on schools here in Ohio, specifically recently, and I look at the role of our literacy coaches as they are navigating the waters of the third grade reading guarantee assessments, the kindergarten readiness assessment process, RTI progress monitoring, universal screening, all of those responsibilities fall to our literacy coaches. So my daughter, for example, who is in kindergarten in our district this year, who is demonstrating some reading difficulties, we just got a permission slip 2 days ago for her to start seeing the literacy coach. Now our coach should be coaching as well, that's a different story. But it's just now on the radar of the literacy coach, 9 weeks into the school year. And my daughter came from our preschool program as well. And that's simply a factor of the literacy coach's preoccupation with kindergarten readiness assessments, Ames web screening, which is our universal screener, and all the other pressures that they face. So we have to consider from the teacher's perspective these policies as they're intended to be implemented and who's going to actually do the implementing. The teachers have kids in their classrooms all day long. So the coaches, we end up using them less and less to coach, therefore supporting the teachers less and less, which I think is a huge challenge and a detriment. Lastly, I think one thing for us to think about, or you to think about, those of you in this room, is how can we support coaches in coaching in terms of professional development. Both speakers talked about professional development and how critical it is. So if it's my job from the district's perspective to get the teachers into the classroom, or to get the teachers in with the coaches, into the classroom, or the coaches in with the teachers to do that coaching, frequent coaching. And it's also my job to provide the professional development for the coaches so that they have the resources, knowledge, skills that they need to support the teachers. And I think, which of those two areas do I need help with? And I need help with the professional development. I have 15 coaches. Professional development's expensive. I think of the districts I've worked in previously with 0 or 1 literacy coaches. A scale of 15 is a lot better than a scale of 1 when you're trying to find those resources. So I think community or regional networks for coaches with professional development would be a great benefit and something that we could think about. And I'll close with that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jack. Whoops, I think we got it. Is it working okay? All right, thanks. Hello, everyone. I am Senator Peggy Lehner, and I chair the Senate Education Committee. I really have enjoyed myself the last 2 days being here at Crane and hearing some wonderful speakers and really providing a great deal of helpful information to me as a legislator. I would like to take this opportunity real quickly, though, to thank Tanny Crane and Laura Justice and your entire team for putting on an outstanding event. And I really hope we don't have to wait 9 more years to do it again. I'd like to focus just a little bit on kind of where do we go from here from a legislative perspective, because first off, I do not think it's possible to create any kind of widespread or universal pre-K program without the help and the assistance and a great deal of funding from the state. I'm sure you all wish you could do it without us because we tend to mucky things up, but you can't, so we're going to have to partner in this and work to make sure it's done really well. In order to advance the notion of early childhood education within the state budget and policy, you have to be aware, first off, that this is an issue that really hasn't been on the radar screen until fairly recently. I've been chairman of the Education Committee for 4 years, and I would say it's only been in the last 2, maybe 3 years that there's been any discussion about this at all. And so you're sort of starting from ground zero. You all are absolutely immersed in this topic and in education on a regular basis, but you have to remember most legislators are not. I have found just to get many of my colleagues to appreciate the value of early childhood is a difficult task, and not to be sexist about this, but it's particularly difficult with men who seem to have relegated early childhood experiences to their wives, and they don't have a clue what it actually costs. I had a significant leader in the Senate say that his kids, it was ridiculous that we needed $4,500 per child, which you know is half of what we really need, because after all, it only cost him $2,000 to send his kids to high-quality preschool. And so we researched that and determined that was because his children were on full scholarship. But anyway, but that's the sort of thing that we run up against. So first off, we have a major education of the legislators issue. They need to understand the value, hear things like what we heard from Andrew and Hero today, and that so many of you have to offer. That information needs to get through to them. And one thing that has been frustrating to me is it needs to be clear and consistent. I have found that so much information within the early childhood world is just not consistent. I'm going to throw one example out, not to throw anybody under the bus here, Andrew, but Andrew quoted that 1% of kids in Ohio were on publicly funded early childhood. I've got the Ohio Kids Count, and it says it's 7%. Now, they're both right, but they were referring to different things. He was calling just publicly funded preschool, whereas they're talking about everything from Head Start to summer camps, et cetera. So, but when legislators hear 1% and then 7%, it's kind of like, well, these people don't really know what they're talking about. And it gives them an excuse to say the problem isn't really what you're making it out to be. So we need to provide clear, consistent information, valid information, and there's so much of it. It's not like we have to make it up or anything. So that task is just something everyone kind of needs to put their heads together and agree on what figures we're going to be using. I've been trying for some time to find out, for example, how many kids actually are unserved, and no one can tell me that. How many kids are there that need served? What will it cost us to provide that service? So we need those things. So education is one thing. They have to understand the issue. The second thing is there has to be political will. I know you all believe that legislators do everything because it's the right thing to do. But sometimes it takes a little bit of pushing. So just some simple things you can do without exerting any effort at all. The next time a candidate knocks on your door with a piece of literature, ask them where they are in early childhood. The next time you get a letter in the mail asking you for some money for a political candidate, write back and say, I'd love to donate, but where are you on early childhood education? If you're at a candidates forum, ask the question, where are you on early childhood? These are the sort of things that raise the awareness of elected officials to the importance of an issue. And it's not just that they're sitting there taking count of how many people ask them this thing, but when they hear something over and over, they get concerned. I mean, for example, they've been real concerned about the Common Core lately because every time they turn around, they've got someone asking them about it. So they think it's a really big issue when it really isn't, but they think it is. So, you know, keep that in mind. I'm glad to hear you didn't boo me on that one. So, you know, these are just two things that need to go side by side for us to really advance this agenda. And I'm hoping we've gotten, in the last 2 years, we managed to pick up $46 million in the budget that wasn't there. We're going to continue to push. We need to quit doing this in small increments and do it in larger hunks. But it's happening, and events like this are certainly going to contribute to that. So once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you. I've learned a lot, and hopefully we'll get this done here in Ohio in the near future. Thank you.
I was chuckling because someone in this room came up to me and said he's a school board member up in Worthington, and we met because he knocked on my door. And I said, why, come on in. I'm on the faculty of the College of Education and Human Ecology. Let's talk. So that was fascinating to hear different reactions, and I think different lenses for how we think about the topic of early childhood education, issues of access, issues of quality. And at the end of the day, to move forward, it does involve the intersection of research, practice, and policy. So I'm just tickled that you all agreed to do this and think through this with us. So thank you, all of you. We have our 3 discussants here, as well as both of our speakers. And so if you'd like, we could spend a few minutes asking them any questions that might be on your mind to close the day. Yes? If you could talk really loud.
Yes, I can.
Oh, you have a microphone.
I have a mic too, if you'd like one.
Probably actually don't need it. How do we deal with the discrepancy between kind of the policy definition of high quality versus what we heard today, which is really what high quality education is? Because one side can claim we have high quality and the other side says we don't. And so how do we bring those two together so that we're talking about the same thing?
So I think it's now public. The Seattle proposal for universal pre-K incorporated the research evidence on what quality means. So it is perfectly possible for a detailed policy proposal to indicate what they mean by quality. Seattle is taking an unusually and thoughtfully gradual approach. About 10% expansion per year is what they are putting before the voters in a few weeks on election day. So, and they did an unusual amount of getting input from researchers and combing the research evidence. So I think it is possible for a city or state. And there are aspects of this in the federal preschool money, which Columbus is applying for today, I think, which are also some of these same principles we've talked about, like issues of evidence-based curricula and coaching.
I would like to say that I think that one of the questions I get asked most frequently by colleagues is, what do you mean by high quality? So that question is out there. But I think that they're more than open to being informed by evidence, real evidence, and research-based answer to that question. So I think that as we move forward and put into law for the very first time, that we will have a high-quality program, that we define that. And I think we can define it based on the type of information we've been given today.
I would add one other quick note to that just came to my mind. New Jersey has what they've been, they call the Abbott preschool programs. They've been doing that since about 2000. And in that piece of policy, they define what high quality is as well. And they define it in terms of some of these things we've already mentioned, in terms of coaching, literacy coaches, in terms of teacher degrees, in terms of square footage in the classroom, et cetera. And I would be happy to share that information with anyone who would be interested.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question. And I think, you know, I like to put quality into the 2 boxes like I talked about, where you have the structural pieces of quality and then you have the process pieces of quality. And presumably that higher structural quality, higher levels of education, more, you know, a comprehensive curriculum, more professional development should change the interaction, should change the processes in the classroom. And in fact, if you look back into the studies of quality and outcomes in the 1980s, where there was a wide range of structural features, where class sizes might have been 32, instead of 20, what you find is actually some evidence that higher structural quality, lower class sizes or adhering to the to the minimum standard actually is a benefit to young children. I think so I also want to say that some of these indicators of quality are important dimensions of a high quality program, even if they don't have any effect on the learning and development of young kids. The bachelor's degrees for teachers helps professionalize the field, which is a really important thing in early childhood education. So it's not this notion that this is childcare or babysitting. It's part of a early childhood continuum of high quality experiences, and so that these teachers in early childhood and pre-K feel connected to and equal to those in the K-12 system. So I think for me, the structural quality pieces are important, particularly when the structures weren't there, when the regulations weren't there, and you found wide range of variability in quality. Now that structural quality has been enforced, the variability that you find is the difference between 22 kids in a class and 18 in a class. It's no wonder why you don't find those things make a difference on kids' learning and development. So I feel like in some ways, through research, we've been able to, and through the institutionalization of early childhood, we've been able to narrow the structural quality and put that in place. But I think that's a necessary piece to it, but it's not sufficient to ensure kids learn and develop. That's the process part.
Is there another question?
I'll be the brave soul. So I have a couple of questions as it related to family engagement that came across in sorry. And so I actually had two questions. And so the first question, they're both to, and I don't want to pronounce your last name incorrectly, to Dr. Yoshikawa.
It's perfect.
And so the first question, when you shared your research about Head Start having these long-term effects as far as improving teenage pregnancy and those types of things, do you think that that can be attributed to Head Start, or does that also have to do with the types of families that make the decisions to go into Head Start and their reasonings for making those choices rather than families that choose not to? And then the second question had to do with the Boston Pre-K model. Because I noticed that you shared that families were getting guides about schooling and all of that, but was there a positive increase in family engagement for those families that children participated in the Boston Preschool program in families beforehand?
Yeah, those are great questions, and I think any other thoughts from the discussants and Andy would be great. On Head Start, there's evidence on those long-term effects on things like reduced crime, on high school graduation, not just from Head Start studies, but certainly from some of these other studies like the Preschool or the Chicago Parent-Child Centers. And the Chicago evaluation showed a very important role for parent engagement as an explanation for some of its long-term effects. So that's a very important study from that perspective. In our meta-analysis, actually I realized I left out a slide that should have been in the, and it's a key point in our Investing in Our Future report around the kind of parent education that makes a difference in preschool. So what we did across that study was to try to look to see what was the kind of support for parenting that can actually improve children's cognitive skills above and beyond the preschool program alone. And so it turned out there were two kinds of parenting support programs in our database, and one was the kind that was basically limited to workshops and parenting classes. And the other was the form of actually providing more like a parenting coach or someone who allows the parent to actually practice new skills through modeling and feedback. And it was that latter kind of parenting education that was associated with stronger gains in cognitive skills. And so there was no evidence that parenting classes and workshops by themselves, didactic support for parenting and providing things like information about children's development, made much of a difference for children's learning. It was the opportunity to practice new skills. And so that to me signifies, I think, the challenge for the field, which is the field of early childhood is built on the capacities of adults, right? So we have to support the capacities of adults, whether they're parents or caregivers or teachers, in order to improve the learning and health and development of children. And so that was a little a study around parenting education. But the other theme that I think is emerging as an important kind of new wave of study programs is what are called dual generation programs. And these are programs that try to support parents' own education and job skills while their children are in quality early childhood programs. And so I think this is a key innovation that is emerging in the field to pay attention to. We still don't have enough research evidence around the impacts of this. We're evaluating a program in Tulsa and should, in a couple of years have some evidence on whether this program, which provides intensive sectoral workforce development in the healthcare field, also supports contextualized curricula in GED classes and in high school and classes, and also provides ESL classes with some content focus on parenting. So those are some of the things that the Tulsa Head Start program is now providing with weekly peer meetings of parents to build their social capital as well. And turns out this support is, we think, very, very important in these kinds of programs. So I'm glad you mentioned the parent theme, and that's certainly been a very important piece of the Head Start model. And often, I have to say, it is not as strong in some of the public pre-K programs. And it's because Head Start has a very long-standing history of parent and community engagement and mental health component and a social service component that is still, I think, to some extent, a model for how school-based programs should be thinking about pre-K.
Are there additional questions? Ms. Crane, so.
Any one of you, but if a group of us wanted to take a field trip to visit some best practices, so where we could go to a city or wherever to both hear from and experience best-in-class quality preschool, where would you suggest we go? All of you.
Well, I would say come to New Jersey, but that's just because I want you to come to New Jersey. But yeah, I would say come to New Jersey and visit some of the Abbott preschools.
Yeah, so the Seattle City Council, Tim Burgess has been the kind of policy architect behind this whole push for quality preschool in Seattle. And he got a group of about 30 people who included some of the key legislators, some of the key people at the state level, like Ruth Kagi, who's been this decades-long advocate within the state of Washington for early childhood, and a variety of other stakeholders, some of the business leaders in Seattle who he had also brought together to visit Boston, New Jersey, the Abbott preschools, and DC. DC has been very innovative in its approach to blending funding to now reach 90% coverage for 4-year-olds with a coaching approach that is also quite innovative in not quite as luxurious the ratios as in Boston, 10 to 12, closer to kind of 20 to 25, but with very interesting way to cycle those coaches in intensive ways through subgroups of teachers so that teachers still get an intensive experience rather than a kind of a scattered experience from their coaches. So they visited those 3 sites about, I think, 6 months ago to prepare for the Seattle proposal.
It's been 10 years since I was there, but I assume the center is still there. It's in Georgia, as I mentioned. Georgia is the first state to adopt universal pre-K in 1994. And at Georgia State University, there is a state-funded pre-K program that serves as the model for many of the programs across the Atlanta area and across the state. So it's high quality in terms of its physical, space, and then also in terms of the interactions that are provided to young kids, to a very diverse group of young kids in an urban environment. So I would recommend that.
Are there other questions?
Yeah, in Oregon, again, we serve 10%, according to the same statistics I shared. It's 10% of 4-year-old kids in our public pre-K program, which is actually a combined Head Start and state-funded program, so it's a single program. And what we end up with at the first day of kindergarten is kids who've never stepped foot in any kind of educational setting. And so in the county where I live, Multnomah County in Portland is part of that, these schools were recognizing that we need to do something with these kids before they enter school. And so what came out of that was a kindergarten transition program in the summer for 2 to 3 weeks, where parents come in for 2 to 3 meetings as a part of this program. The premise behind the program is for kids to practice kindergarten. It's not about drilling and killing letters. It's not about readiness in the sense of do you know your ABCs. It's about routines and it's about relationships. And it's getting kids comfortable so that the time and the productive use of time can happen way earlier in the school year. The parent component to that involves a library. And so librarians come in and they talk with parents about getting a library card, and that's an option for them. And a lot of what you find with parents is that one of the major barriers is just knowledge. Just how do I go about doing that? And so the library card is one part of it, and then examples of book readings where the librarian will read books with the parents, and then the parents go back and read books to kids, even if it's not in the kids, even if it's not in English. The practice itself of doing that is a benefit to young kids. So that's the one example I have of integrating the great resource of a library into helping parents then be able to provide supports at home with kids.
I wonder, Laura, whether you have so much of your research is around issues of book reading and those kinds of things, around the role of libraries.
Yeah, well, the one thing I'll say is in Columbus, I don't know what library you're with. You're in Worthington. We're working together. Yes. We're already partnering. Yes. I already mentioned today, I'm totally losing my vision. But we have such a robust library system in this city, and the Columbus Metropolitan Library with 22 or more branches is outstanding, and I think they do a lot of very innovative activities. And Worthington is really trying to do some important work. What we're collaborating in particularly is in Worthington, we have a large Latino population of young kids. A number of the parents are undocumented, and Head Start, if anybody here is from Head Start, has cut their busing. So the kids in the homes cannot access Head Start anymore. And so the library is actually really trying to step up the plate and say, what kind of services can we provide in this very unmet situation where you have families that aren't being served by Head Start. The kids are too young to go to the public school, and so the library is really trying to step up. So Andy, I think that's a fantastic example.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Are you ready?
You just mentioned transportation, and that's one of the things that I've heard is a significant barrier to early childhood programs. And I'm just interested from those of you who have experience outside of Ohio, how that has been addressed or resolved.
It's part of the Boston pre-K system. So part of the costs were the transportation of the 4-year-olds within zones, within the kind of public school zones that the city has established. And so and there's a complex parental ranking of schools that happens within zone. With you're more likely to get to school if it's within your zone, your neighborhood, and that kind of thing. But there is also transportation provided. So it's very important to raise that as it's part of the cost and the budgeting that has to be taken into account.
Is it do you put 3-year-olds on a bus with 8th graders?
That's a good question. I don't think they do, but I would have to find out. I can find that out for you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Other questions? How about one last burning question? Or two, if there's two burning.
Man, no pressure. I'm just curious where you see the birth to 3 systems kind of flowing into the preschool, because I'm a birth to 5 director, as well as, what is the research on home visiting? In those situations, a lot of times we provide a 3 to 5 home visiting component when we can't provide transportation for hard to reach families.
Good question.
I think the evidence on birth to 3 is that it's very, very important to provide support to the families that are most vulnerable and most likely to experience what might be the most severe forms of stress. I think many of you probably heard the phrase toxic stress, which is what happens when a child's stress system is kind of activated chronically and excessively beyond kind of the norm, and there are lifelong health as well as learning consequences of that. So I think the evidence around birth to 3 is that we need to build first of all, a universal screening system, probably out of primary care during prenatal and postnatal visits to understand the level of strengths and needs of families, and then target fairly intensive services to those families that are experiencing the highest forms of economic stress, issues like intimate partner violence, issues like mental health problems, postpartum depression, or kind of depression really due to the stresses of living in poverty. Those kinds of high-risk families, the evidence around home visiting suggests that there's some benefits to targeting those families, and then to also think about first-time moms and that group. So there's been a real innovative recent study in Durham called evaluation of a program called Durham Connects, where the screening was provided through universal home visits, like a single home visit by a trained home visitor across the city. And for the research geeks in the room, it's a very nice pseudo-random assignment design where if your child's birthday was on an odd day, you got this home visit, and if it was even, you didn't, because they didn't have actually the money to cover the whole city. And so Ken Dodge and his colleagues, Ben Goodman, did a terrific evaluation. By the end of the first year, there were reduced, so these home visitors then referred families to the services and there were efforts to try to coordinate services in the city of Durham across the different systems, health and child protection and other kinds of more intensive home visiting services. And by the end of the first year, there were reductions in accidental injuries and in ER visits. So there's some evidence that that program was already starting to save money after the first year of life.
I'd like to just add that there's also significant evidence that robust 0 to 3 home visiting programs reduce infant mortality rates, and that's something that we've been looking at real closely in the state lately.
Yes. Jennifer.
So I guess my question is more from a parent's perspective. How do we help parents decide what preschool is high quality? And in rural areas where there might be a high quality desert, as was described, is any preschool experience better than no preschool experience?
That's a good question.
Panelists?
I think that's a really hard question. I think that it is our hope, all across the nation, that the QRIS systems will help inform parents across all SES levels about what high quality is. So these will serve as sort of markers of quality that will inform the consumer. So we're hoping that the system works in that way, as well as a way to help us ensure program monitoring and to build quality across the different states. The last part of your question in terms of the ECE deserts and, is bad quality care better than no care? I just think that's a hard question. It depends on how bad it is, because, because I can imagine some situations that might be really, really, really bad, and no, we would rather the child just not experience any type of ECE. But I don't know. It's a hard one.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me personally as a parent, as someone who also has been in hundreds of pre-K classrooms, you see some really bad stuff on certain occasions. And when you think about quality of interactions and you think about scores, on average on 5 on emotional support, you've got variance in those scores. You've got punitivity, you've got negativity, you've got yelling, you've got hitting. I mean, that's hopefully the rare exception. But for me personally, I would not send my daughter or son to a program like that.
We really don't want to end on this note. There's got to be one more question. Actually, my dean, Cheryl Ochterberg, is here to close today's session. I'm going to turn it over to her, and I just want to thank her for providing the type of leadership that we have in our college to give us opportunities like this to really raise topics like this to the highest level at this institution. So let me turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll try to change the tone here at the end, but I want to begin by saying that I'm humbled and grateful to be part of this group, grateful to be invited, and I thank our speakers and our panelists so much for this rich conversation and insight. A couple of reflections here. I think, Andy, as I heard you mention, this is a remarkable meeting of the minds here, civic, government, business, academic, all coming together to wrestle with something we all care deeply about, but we tend to work each in our own little streams. And what we need to do is bring ourselves together so that we are a torrent of pressure to make for the policy and the funding that we ultimately need for the sake of our children. I'd also like to say I'm very excited and pleased to learn as I listen to our speakers and our panel that the beginning results we're finding here in Columbus seem to align to the results that we heard about in Tulsa and in Boston. And that's really exciting. It means that we're on the right track. It means that we can learn from and perhaps translate some of this research directly into practice here in Columbus. And it means that I believe also we can refer to these studies to help us justify that evidence, some of the interventions and the programming that we're doing here in Columbus. So that was really very, very gratifying to hear, and we didn't pay you to do that, so that makes it even better. But also as I listened to all these comments, it brought me back to that old Chicago school of philosophy that basically holds, first it begins with what is an educational experience or an educational event. And I think that's very important for us to keep in the top of our minds, that an educational experience or event is one that's planned, it's intentional, and it's informed. It's informed by experience, and in our case, by evidence or research. That's what makes this early child learning so important, and to distinguish it from babysitting or childcare. Education is planned, it's informed, it's intentional. That's not what babysitting is about. But I also want to revisit that school of thought in terms of, again, educational events, that they're always comprised of four big interactive elements. And one of those is the teacher. And we learned today that the teacher matters. The teacher's preparation, the teacher's background matters, makes a difference. Love is not enough. They have to know something. Love's important. Don't want to take that away. But they have to know something about children's development to make the right choices in the best interest of their students. The students' characteristics, the children's characteristics are also important. So the second major element there, teacher, student, we learned that first language makes a difference. We learned that SES makes a difference. Sometimes now I think it's not popular to talk about student or children's characteristics. It's not considered PC, but it matters. So we have to look at it. We have to consider it. The third big element, teachers, students, curriculum and content. We heard again from the research. That makes a difference, choosing what kinds of material to teach. We learned that some of that subject-specific instruction has a bigger impact than just a large global curriculum. We have to keep that in mind. And then the fourth area is always the fuzziest area when we talk about it, but we heard today some of these areas. Governance. What are the rules? What is the construct? What does the building look like? How much square footage are there? What are the facilities for the kids? So it's all of these things that interact that produce the outcome. And even though these studies weren't specifically designed to address it like that, those are the threads that I kept hearing out of all the studies and out of the comments. So I think we can always go back to those four basics and say, what are we doing there? What are we doing with the teacher? We heard about professional development. What are we doing with the child? How are we adapting what we do to fit that child best? What are we doing in terms of our curriculum, our content, those choices? And what are we doing about that structure? Infrastructure, hard, soft, and what the rules are around it. It's a dynamic process. We heard that. We know that. But I think we have the seeds here to really move forward with something that's substantial and significant and meaningful. Maybe it's step by step. Maybe those steps aren't everything all at once. But I think we have here together this meeting of minds and the background and the will now to make a difference and put it all to work. But enough of my reflections. What's most important for me to do is to give great big thank yous and call outs. So first to our distinguished speakers, Andy and Harold, thank you so much for visiting Columbus. We really appreciate it. Let's give them. I'd also like to thank all of our panelists. Senator, thank you for giving us your very, very precious time and attention. Jack and Stephanie, thank you so much. Please. It's also very important for us to give a special thank you to Tammy Crane and the Crane family for their generous support, both for the center and today's conference, because truly we couldn't have this kind of meeting without their support to pull together the resources to bring these conversations and conferences together with the idea of joining federal, state, and local policy to research-driven evidence. So again, thank you. And in closing, I'd also like to thank and recognize Dr. Laura Justice and the entire team at the Crane Center for their collaboration, bringing this program together, arranging for this meeting here today. And you know, it provides us with the courage, the support, and the inspiration for us to continue our work in this state and in this county and in this community for pre-K expansion. Thank you so much.